So, has anyone heard of havening before? So, very, very basically, it's a relatively new therapy in terms of therapies. It's only been around a couple of decades, and it's been created by two twin brother doctors from the US, who one's a neuroscientist and one's a physician. And they started to recognize what was going on in the brain when we were experiencing trauma or stress or anxiety. And we know through decades of studying the brain that if we go through something traumatic, then it essentially creates new wiring within the brain. And what happens is anytime we go through something that we perceive to be traumatic or stressful, and it's really important to know that other people don't need to experience it as traumatic as and stressful, it's how you perceive it. Essentially, what happens is our brain hard records everything we experience in that moment to protect us should we get into that situation again. So, if, for example, you were bitten by a dog when you were 5 years old, very traumatic and stressful, absolutely your brain would have recorded that your grandmother's dog bit you when it was a black Labrador. But actually, your brain would have recorded what the teeth looked like, the noise of the growl. But it also would have recorded perhaps that in the background there was a certain song playing, or your mother was cooking a roast beef dinner and you could smell it cooking, or you were wearing a yellow top. And your brain would have recorded lots and lots of sensory information around there. And this is how and I'm really simplifying this because of time, but this is how we can often get triggered by things that rationally we don't understand. And we think, why has that brought back that memory? Why has that triggered me and made me feel really scared or anxious or upset? And it was believed that when this happened, it creates, well, it creates something called a synaptic connection, which is basically this weird onion looking thing behind me. It's where the brain communicates. And it was believed that once we had a traumatic synaptic connection, it was essentially super glued together. So we would always remember that and we would always have that strong response to it. And what the Rudin brothers found out was that absolutely that is the case. However, if whilst we are experiencing that traumatic memory, if we can change the brain waves, what happens is we dephosphorize the connection. In very simple terms, we unstick it. And so they found out that there are multiple ways we can change the brain waves when we're recording a connection, but the most simple one is what they call the havening touch. So if I stroke from my shoulders to my elbows repeatedly, I start to move into a delta wave connection, which is a very low, relaxed wave. Interestingly, we're in delta wave a lot as children. It's very good for learning. However, if we have gone through something traumatic, we're in very active brain waves. So it starts, if you imagine a radio wave, instead of it being really peaked and troughed, it starts to slow the brain waves down. Another one is if I stroke down my face like this. And then another one is rolling the palms. And they found that when we are activated, triggered by something, if we apply this havening touch, what happens is not only does our SUD score, our discomfort at that memory decrease rapidly, but it is permanent, which actually we can't often say about therapies. So essentially what happens is when we relax the brain, we unstick that synaptic connection. And the most common response I get when I take clients through it is, yeah, I know that happened, but it's like I'm watching it on a film. So I have this sense of like, it happened, but I'm not a participant anymore. Or I know it happened, but I just don't really care about it anymore. And it feels quite distant and I can't quite grasp it. So it's an incredible therapy that I especially use a lot for trauma because I use a lot of different therapies, as I mentioned at the beginning. In my experience, havening is quick. There's very little risk of any kind of ab reaction to it. And also what I love and what's really important is I can teach it to the client. So the client then, once they know how to apply it, can actually apply it if a future event happens, if they get upset, if they're anxious. And the way I describe havening to a client is it's like water. So we can use the water to put out a fire. So if something is really triggering you, we can use the water to put the fire out. We can also use the water to water a seed. So if we want to feel more confident, if we want to be more calm, if we want to prepare ourselves for a job interview, anything, we can use it for that as well. And it's just an incredible tool. It's probably my preferred tool in my toolkit. And it's something that if any of you are struggling with a trauma that you've been carrying around for a long time, I would really encourage you to find out about it, investigate it. With havening, the client doesn't have to tell you or even know what it is. So we can just work on a word, we can work on a color, I've had a client just say to me, red, it's just red, it's just red. Absolutely fine. And I think Catherine mentioned earlier, particularly some older generation males sometimes feel more uncomfortable with talking about those sorts of things. I actually have more male clients than female clients, and they generally use havening more than any of my other modalities because they don't have to tell me anything. They don't have to. The analogy I always use, which isn't attractive, but it's really effective, is we don't have to pick the scab, right? We don't have to take that off to then find out what's underneath it. We can actually just use what we're dealing with now, and it still has a really deep, profound effect. So I've sent the link there to the Havening website. I've used it for people who've had accidents, sexual abuse, rape, sexual assault, all sorts of things, and the impact is phenomenal on it.